Hi, I'm Corey Driver, and this is Moving Forward. So this week we are in Exodus 24 and Matthew 17. It's Mountain Week. Hooray! The experiences on the mountains are going to be transformative and light and fiery and really super cool. But what I want us to draw, I'm telling you at the very beginning, what I want us to draw from these passages is God's intimacy with people. Okay? So here we go. I want to provide a little context for the episode at Sinai. So God has already been speaking to Moses for some years now, we think, for certainly some time. And God has said, here is what I want. I want my people to be brought to me so that they can be with me and worship me in freedom and without fear. Okay? So Moses at Sinai is going up and down the mountain a few times, right? And has gone up and has heard God's commands and God's law and comes back down and writes what he has heard. This is the oral law that Moses writes down, okay? The 10 commandments, or however many commandments that are written on the stone, those will come in 40 days, right? We're not there yet, okay? This is the oral law that Moses is hearing and recording, okay? And the people love it. They agree. Yes, yes. They agree twice, in fact. And Moses performs the covenantal ceremony, sprinkling blood and doing all the things, right? The unification has happened. God and God's people are on the same team. The people agree to the law, and it's fantastic. They'll get the stone commandments at some point, but they're in, right? And it is so good, and it's so good that God wants to have a party. Okay, this is Exodus 24. So Moses, Aaron, his sons, the 70 elders, sort of a proto-Sanhedrin, if you will, are all invited by God to come up the mountain, right? It's not just Moses anymore. So they come up the mountain, and you know what happens? They have the Sinai communion. They eat and drink with God. They're having bread and wine, among other things, and they are maybe a little scared, right? How often do you have a meal with God on the top of the mountain? Well, at least once. And they break bread with God, and they are not harmed. Okay, the text is explicit. You think they're going to be harmed. They're not. Okay? Now, humans in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament are scared of angels, at least, right? When an angel shows up, people frequently fall on their face, and the angel has to say, fear not, right? That's an angel. That's not God, right? Like when you see God, an overwhelming experience, okay? So the 70 elders, Nadav, Abihu, Aaron, Moses, all these folk are eating a meal with God, and they are not harmed. Now, we should remember that God is seen relatively often in the Hebrew Bible, right? Even Adam see God. Abraham sees God. Hagar sees God, right? Isaiah the prophet sees God. Moses is going to see God on multiple occasions, right? People see God and don't die, right? So this whole notion of like no human can see God, well, it doesn't really bear out in the text of the Bible. But anyway, God invites people up on the mountain to have a celebratory meal. What kind of celebratory meal? Well, theologians and biblical interpreters say that this is a wedding feast, right? That God and God's people have come together as a union, that they have signed a marital contract, as it were. They've gone through a ceremony uniting them together. And now they're going to spend some time together after a wedding feast, right? And so Moses and God will spend 40 days together on the mountaintop. And then God and God's people in the wilderness will spend 40 years together. And you may say, well, wait a second. that wasn't all great, right? That generation of Israelites died. And that's true, certainly. But it also, in God's memory, is a kind of honeymoon, right? Jeremiah is going to remind us that God viewed this as a marriage and a honeymoon and a getting to know you period, the wilderness sojourn, right? And so on the mountain, sure, laws and everything, and we can get lost in that. But we need to keep in mind the context of intimacy, of union, of wedding, where God takes God's people and says, I want to be with you forever, right? That's the shocking intimacy that is here. Let's eat, right? You thought you couldn't see me. I'm going to do you one better. Not only can you see me, let's eat together. Let's be united together. Let's be married. So then we go to Matthew 17, and we have another mountaintop experience. This time it's not 70, it's 3 disciples and Jesus. And God shows up in a cloud, as God likes to do on mountains sometimes. And the whole transfiguration is really neat. The shiny clothes, super cool. I want to focus on what happens just afterwards. God proclaims in the hearing of Jesus' core disciples, this is my beloved son. Okay? And it's all very overwhelming. And the disciples feel afraid, as people do in the presence of God, right? And then what happens? Jesus, who has been transfigured, who has had a sort of unifying moment with God the Father, touches the disciples, right? The text, he touches them and tells them, it's okay. Right, let's go. You don't have to be afraid, right? Jesus, in this moment of being who he really is, right? The Son of God, also thinks about the experience of his disciples. And he, with his transfigured body, I think, touches them, says it's okay. And so as they're going down the mountain, there's this moment of intimacy where I think they finally get it. Jesus has told them, not for the first time, that he is going to be killed. And somehow he will be resurrected, and somehow that resurrection will affect salvation. Disciples don't really know. And they've kind of waved off this suggestion that Jesus will be killed. But all of a sudden they get it. And in a moment of clarity, their only objection is, isn't this happening out of order? Wasn't, Elijah supposed to come first? And Jesus, I have to think with like a smile, maybe a giggle even, right? Like, you've just seen the Transfiguration, friends? Says, yeah, you're right. You're right. And if you can believe it, Elijah has come in my relative, John the Baptizer. Right? And you know what? They killed him. And you know what else? They're going to kill me in order to provide salvation, right? This mountaintop experience could have simply been a mountaintop experience. Jesus's skin and hair and eyes and clothes could have been utterly transfigured and could have gone on there with power and display and really bright clothes and all sorts of weirdness. But what happens instead is Jesus touches his disciples and calms their fears and answers their questions, which might be a little beside the point, but answers their question and then says, this is what I will do for you, right? That is the intimacy of the mountaintop moment where God says, you are my beloved son. And Jesus says, I, as the beloved son, will die and be resurrected for you. On the mountaintop, I told you at the top, we see intimacy, whether it is a wedding feast of God celebrating the people becoming God's people, or whether it is Jesus taking a break from being transfigured to touch, calm, and converse with. The God we meet on the mountaintop and every place else is a God who desires intimacy with God's people.